So, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Again, a very warm welcome. You've reached Module 5 of a 5-module series for Workforce Development for the PSM project. I'm Andrew Brown. I'm the Workforce Development Specialist, and I'm going to be your facilitator for today. I want to ask you to be muting your microphones, please, for the benefit of everyone. And you will note, if you've been on previous modules, that I really like to use the Skype chat. So on the screen, you should be able to see the Skype chat as well as the slides. You will have been sent, attached to the invitation, a session overview that we'll have a look at in a moment. It contains some pre-reading as well as some post-reading activities. You'll also note in the invitation that if you've missed the previous 4 modules, but you would like to listen to a recording or listen to a recording as well as review the resources from those modules, then I've provided the links for you to do so. There is an opportunity for people participating in the series to receive a certificate of competence entry level as a workforce development advisor, and to do that you need to complete all 5 of the assignments, and that's something that's open to everyone. But if you're online today just to listen to the webinar and to engage with us, then you're also very welcome. Throughout the talk today, if you've got any questions or any notes that you want to make, then please do those in the Skype chat so we can all see. Thank you to those who have noted that they're online today and what country you're from and your position. It's great to have both headquarters as well as a range of countries represented. And I think we might be up to 5 continents today. I'll let Alexis do the math on the continents, but I think we're pretty close to that. So let's move ahead together. What we did last week, I'd like to just to remind us that Module 4 happened last week, and in that particular module we went into some detail regarding human resources management interventions. If you remember, we've been using the bus analogy, that our organisation is a bus, thinking about the right people on the bus, getting people in the correct seats and keeping people on the bus and getting the wrong people off the bus. And there was quite a bit of pre and post reading in relation to that module if you wanted to go deeper to really understand that. And a particular feature of last week is I provided you with a full set of templates that you could use as part of helping to operationalize procedures in the organizations that you're supporting for human resources management, whether it was from job description templates to process for preparing for interviews, conducting interviews, and exit procedures. So they are all there. For this particular module, Module 5, it's a focus on professional development of yourself as well as others. So the way I want you to think about this particular module is to focus on how you would apply what we're talking about to yourself. And then if you have a role supervising others or working with other organizations like government organizations to support the strengthening of individuals in those organizations, then you'll be able to use what you learn from this module to not only assist yourself, but also to assist others in their own professional development. The way we're going to do this is I want to outline to you what I think underpins both professional development as well as 2 weeks ago in Module 3 when we spoke about education approaches, and that is the use of a competency-based approach. And I want to go into that in a bit more detail again today because it underpins so much of what we do in capacity development that involves both supply and demand. By that I mean if you're doing any type of education activity, that's a supply of an education for supply chain management. And in terms of demand, having competency framework also helps to improve the quality of job descriptions so that governments and organizations demand the right people. I want to take the opportunity to introduce two skills, one of professional reflection and also planned professional development. Two skills that as developing professionals we need to understand. And then I also want to introduce to you three available competency assessment approaches that you can use yourself and with others. And then a large part of today is introducing to you a huge amount of resources. Over my 20 years working in this field, I continue to collect and collate information. And you'll be aware that as part of this module, there's what I'm calling the 10-pager, which is a very detailed resource with links to several hundred documents, resources, and case studies around workforce development, which you'll find very helpful, and hopefully you have been finding helpful. Also, to outline the particular assignment that's associated with this module, which is a personal assignment that I think you will find very helpful, even if you're not doing all the assignments for this certificate series. I want to draw your attention to the session outline, and I'd like you to really take the time, if you haven't already, to have a look at this 10-pager available at the Dropbox. The bottom link here is available to PSM colleagues. The top link is an external Dropbox for other people. It has an annex that has links to quite a range of capacity development resources for supply chain. The other pre-reading for this module was some background information about two of the currently available supply chain competency assessment tools, one from Pamela Steele Associates, the other from the Empower School of Health, and I'll provide an overview of that. And then also, I've been using an approach that offers self-reflection against existing job descriptions, and we've been trialing that in Nigeria. And the particular tool that I've been using in Nigeria is present here. And I encourage you to do some background reading about the importance of continued professional development. This is from a different professional industry, but I think is relevant to our context. So I mentioned that competency-based approach is extremely important. In the very first module for this particular series, I emphasized the importance of competency frameworks. And again today, I would like to just go over a couple of points. So on the screen is the people that deliver health supply chain competency framework for managers and leaders. This particular framework is about to undergo some review. But in essence, this framework describes the broad breadth of competencies that must be present in a supply chain system for a system to be functional. Now, in that supply chain system, there will be a variety of people, depending on the country context, who would be responsible for that system. But if you want to have a broad understanding of supply chain in health, then you need to have skills and competencies across all of these 6 areas. Now, you'll see there are 6 different circles that are on this particular slide that represent 6 domains or broad areas of supply chain management. The white ones are technical and the green ones are managerial. So for technical, we have selection and quantification, procurement, storage and distribution, and use. And for management, we have resource management and professional and personal. And when you have a look in detail at this document, which is a link provided in the 10-pager, you'll be able to get line by line, there's approximately 270 different behaviors that you'd need to be able to do if you wanted to understand and practice everything in supply chain management. But of course, we know that only some of us have to do everything. I'm reminded that it's a country I did some work in, Tuvalu, which is a country in the South Pacific. It has one person for their whole supply chain, and they have to do everything. Okay, so the country is 12,000 people. But still, you get the point that depending on your organization, it depends on what particular specialty areas you might need. Matt, who you notice on the call, his specialty area is health supply chains to do with laboratory. and he will have a broad overview of all of these competency areas in relation to laboratory. On the other hand, Anita from Rwanda, she has a little bit of an overview of a range of these, but has a deeper understanding of human resources aspect of resource management. Just to give you a bit of a broad idea how we apply these. And a competency framework is the basis for how we can create good supply chain education relevant to a particular context, but also, as you'll see today, can also be used to help us individually to reflect on our skills and competencies to identify gaps, and also we can use such a tool to help others to identify their competency gaps. And of course, if you've identified a gap, you can then identify a solution on how to bridge that gap. And that's basically where we're going to go to. So in a competency-based approach, so in this framework, and again, this writing will be a little bit small, but you'll see we have these domains, the circles I pointed out, and then under the domains, there's a particular competency areas, and under those competency areas are a whole number of individual behaviors. So it's very detailed. And I'm not going to go through that in detail now, but I just want to point out that it really breaks down all of the skills, attitudes expressed as behaviors that we need to be able to put into practice. And these are the management ones. The two management domains broken down into these 7 and 6 particular areas, which I'll just expand there for you for a moment. So that competency framework gives you that overall list of these particular competencies. And its competency frameworks provide the overall breadth of what's needed in a supply chain and also the depth. And you as an individual will have a different breadth and depth of understanding depending on your job task and depending on your education and workplace experience up to this point in time. So in summary, a competency framework for supply chain management is very important if you want to understand the full scope of what's required in this professional area. And we're going to use that to help us in our competency development of ourselves and of others. Again, as we move along in the talk, if you've got any particular questions or you would like me to elaborate on anything, then please type that into the chat as we go. You can all see that chat on the screen, and you're welcome to ask questions in the chat as we move along, and I'll address those as they come up. The next thing I'd like to do is to talk about 2 professional skills. One is professional reflection. Now, a lot of us are so busy in our day-to-day work doing the tasks required of us in our job that we very rarely stop and, if you like, stand outside of ourselves to think about what we've been doing, how can we do it better, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and what we can do to improve. Now, this process is called professional reflection or critical reflection, where we think about our practice and our ideas. And I'll just remind you to be muting your microphone. Felix, I think that's you. I'm going to mute you. Just check your microphones if you don't mind. There's someone who's got their microphone on. So critical reflection is this process of standing outside yourself or looking in the mirror and critically asking yourself questions about what has happened, what does this mean, and what do I do next because of what's happened. Now, for some of us in our education, particularly in universities in US, United Kingdom, and in Australia, this is taught to students in professions. So if you are a pharmacist or a doctor or an accountant or a different professional, then this is often taught. I have found that in my experience in a lot of lower middle income countries that in pre-service education that this idea of reflecting on yourself or critically judging yourself is not a skill that is openly taught. I recently had experience working remotely with a team of 20 supply chain advisors in Nigeria, and I gave them we were doing some self-reflection assessment, and I gave them a webinar on this topic, and we had some good discussions. And part of that was me again realizing that this particular idea of critically reflecting is new to a lot of people. And so we should not take that for granted, but is necessary if we're going to use self-reflection tools and to do so appropriately. The other aspect which is new to some people is the idea of a personal learning plan. The concept here is that, again, we're very busy, we only have a limited amount of resource, so we should think about our knowledge and skill gaps and plan to improve in those gaps. We shouldn't just take on education opportunities because we think they're interesting. We should take on education opportunities that will help better our skills and competencies for either the job that we're doing or the next job we want to do. It is also true that we do want to develop skills and competencies in different things for pleasure, whether it's a craft, a new language, or some other skills. But in this talk, we're focusing on professional learning plan for your work environment. And continuing professional development is, we're looking to maintain, improve, and broaden knowledge, expertise, and competence. And then a personal learning plan or continual professional development plan is the individual plan of activities that you intend to undertake over a certain period in order to improve certain competencies, I would add. So two things I want you to think about. One is be aware of something called professional reflection, the ability to critically look at yourself and decide what's working and what's not. The second is a personal learning plan. You'll also hear more and more people talking about continuing professional development. And continuing professional development means that there is a responsibility on both the person being developed as well as perhaps within the organization. I like this term as opposed to in-service training, where the feeling is often that the impetus or the responsibility is on the employer to provide the training. The concept around a personal learning plan and continuing professional development is that there is also an onus on the professional to take part and be responsible for the process. Thank you, Anita, for your comment. It's exactly true that you need an enabling environment for critical reflection. You need to create an environment where people are able to do so safely, and in an environment where the data that is collected as part of self-reflection is kept safe and used positively by people for development. So a good example would be in the situation with Nigeria. Initially, there were some concerns that we were watching for, but we noted where the participants were worried that any type of assessment would show their weaknesses, and those weaknesses would be used to remove them from the project or to highlight their problems rather than help them. So we had to make sure we created an environment that was demonstrated by supervisors to explain that this was being used for the purposes of identifying gaps so that we can provide the participants with the extra training and education required to improve those gaps. And we just had a check-in call yesterday where the supervisors had been talking to the 20 participants, and everyone was very positive, on board, and engaging in the process. So in that circumstance, we had created that good environment. Thanks, Anita, for noting that for us. So these particular professional development plans or personal learning plans give individuals the ability to coordinate their learning experience to improve competencies where gaps are identified. There's no point doing training and further education on activities that are improving the skills that you're already good at. Because we often have a limited amount of time and financial resources, using this particular approach of professional reflection, looking for our gaps, and then doing a learning plan is good practice. And again, this might be some new concepts for some people on the call, and I would invite you, if you have particular questions or points for clarification, please type them in for us. I'd like to move on to introduce you to 3 different tools that are available for you to use to go through a process of self-reflection. The first of these tools is by Empower School of Health. It's called the Competency Assessment Tool. They call it CAT. It's a free online tool. It was developed with funding from AIDS Free. It uses the people that deliver Competency Framework that we described, and they now have some, I think, 400 people that have taken the test. And effectively what happens is that they get you to input your education qualifications, your work experience, and then each of these domains, they do these 5 domains, they do 2 things. One, they give you a quiz. It's a 10-question quiz on each of the domains, so there's some objectivity. And then they also ask you to reflect on how well you are performing in particular areas within those domains, and what education you have received in the last couple of years. And what they do is they have an algorithm where they look at educational qualifications, work experience, and domain competency, and give you a report on your strengths and weaknesses in these particular competency areas against all of the people that have taken the test. For the activity that I'm doing in Nigeria, we are trialing each of the 3 tools that I'm showing you today. So we've given 20 people the opportunity to do this test, and then we've paid a little bit more money to ask, so the test itself is free, but then we've paid Empower a little bit of extra money to do a cohort analysis, which looks across the whole cohort and looks at trends and compares those trends to the international data to see how the cohort compares within itself as well as to others. So you can see that if you're looking at these aspects and then looking at your development needs, it actually provides a report to say, well, here are your strengths as an individual and here are your weaknesses. So you can then imagine that if you have such a report, you can then think about what are the educational interventions that are required to improve any gaps that you have. Good question from Zalilim about that there are managerial skills. Yeah, so in the competency framework for supply chain managers and leaders, there is a clear overview of the managerial competencies that are needed to be effective in the supply chain. And you can have a look at those and see what they are. And the ones that are critical for supply chain management professionals are noted in that competency framework and listed out very clearly around leadership, around project management, around change management, around managing people, managing finances, managing other resources. And I encourage you to have a look at that document in detail to get the list of those competencies. Thanks for the question. So individuals get automatic reports from this tool. This is a spider diagram which each individual gets, and that spider diagram notes the 5 different competency areas. The more color, then the stronger you are in that particular competency area, just to give you an idea. And then you'll see there's this little bit down the, moving it around, down the bottom, which is comparing, so this little bar graph here, which is comparing the product selection versus the cohort. So it can be used by organizations or individuals, and you can register for free and you get a detailed report that compares you to the global comparison. So it's a nice little tool that you can use yourself, or you can get individuals you're supervising or organizations that you're trying to work with. They can do these individual assessments. If they do it individually, then they get the reports individually and confidentially. You can also make arrangements to pay a fee and to do a cohort. So that's the Empower tool. As you're thinking whether you have any questions about the Empower tool, I will note that the Empower tool focuses mainly on technical competencies rather than managerial. So just keep that in mind. The next tool that I want to talk about is the Health Supply Chain Leadership Questionnaire. This is a tool that's developed by Pamela Steele Associates. At this point, I'll declare a little conflict of interest, and that is that for both the two tools we're showing today, over the past 5 years, I've had some sort of inputs into both companies with different roles that I have had. So I'll just let you know that this is an area that I've done research in and very passionate about. So I've put input into those tools. This particular tool is not a free tool. It's a tool that there is a fee for, and that fee is around about $100 US, which sounds like a lot of money, but for people who are aware of a range of assessment tools available for managerial skills, it's quite inexpensive. Thank you, Anita, for your professional reflection. Most advice would be that to have a yearly process of professional self-reflection. So to undertake a competency self-assessment test once a year and use that to develop your professional learning plan for that year. And then to perhaps review that in 6 months' time to see how you're progressing, whether your situation has changed, and then to repeat that on at a year. So thank you for that question. So the Pamela Steele Associates Competency Self-Assessment tool looks at a range of leadership competencies, again, across all 6 domains. So it looks at the management domains as well as the high-level competencies for the technical domains. It takes about 60 minutes, and basically it asks you it presents to you a range of one-line behaviours. So you remember, and there's about 200, I think, they use in this one, where you have to think about what's on the screen and then ask yourself how well you can practice that behavior in the workplace. And you've got a 5 or 7 point scale, starting from you don't know how to do that activity at all, or you are an expert in doing that activity in the workplace. And it has inbuilt logic within the tool that watches out for people that are being overly positive or overly negative. But again, the overarching feature of self-assessment tools is that people have to be honest in order to get the best results. And so people need to have an understanding of professional self-assessment to be able to do this. I've taken these tests myself, and I have instructed cohorts of supply chain people to do these tests, and I've been quite happy with the way the tests were approached, the results that were achieved, and how they were applied by individuals. I went over quickly, but there is a video which I won't show now. It's a 10-minute video that's in the slide deck that you can have a look at. It's a link is also provided in the pre-work section of the session plan for this module. So you'll see here, this is the table that shows the scale that you rate yourself against for this particular tool. So from very basic to an outstanding strength. And you can imagine that you need to, again, think yourself, critically reflect, and decide on that. Again, any questions as we go, let me know. The third tool, or the third approach, is an approach that I like to use. It uses these principles, but instead of using the competency framework, it uses your job description. And so this is a process that you can use yourself for your job description, or you can work with people that you supervise on their job description. So basically, a job description has a number of job statements about the work that people need to do. And you can turn those statements around to make them competencies, and then you can put a 5-point scale on it. You can set it up as a Google form, which is what we did for Nigeria, to get people to enter data electronically, or you can use it manually. let me show you what that looks like. So this is the tool that I developed for Nigeria. It's for field logistics advisors. This is the 5-point scale. So people have to, for each of the statements, enter an X in one of these 5 boxes. And if we go down here, you'll see this is what it looks like. So there's a competency area, facility level replenishment and reporting. And so for the first line, ensure donor procured health commodities stock on hand within health facilities continually falls within the min-max range established for each product. And then I would ask myself, which one of these boxes best represents what I can do? So I cannot do this at all, or it's not relevant, or I'm an expert. So there's 5 points to consider here, you can see. And so you can see it's quite a logical approach, but at the end of it, you can go back over your list and you can see which areas you're weak and which areas you're strong. And this is an example of a self-assessment tool, and it simply uses the job description. So you can then imagine if you're an individual and you've used this method, you can see your strengths and weaknesses, and from that you can plan your education interventions. Alternatively, if you're a supervisor and you're working with a staff member using this tool, then you can work with the staff member, make sure you create the right environment to help them develop a staff plan to improve their competency. Quite simple, but just takes those competencies and needs the right environment to move forward. The PSA competency assessment is paid for because PSA as a private company developed that tool themselves. They paid for it to be developed. So it's wasn't paid for by a donor. So it's not free. So for the Nigeria situation, we negotiated a price for the cohort, which was a little bit less than the advertised price, but that's why. Okay, so again, I've just introduced you 3 different ways that you can do self-reflection. The first one was an Empower tool, which is a free online tool for technical competencies. The second was the Pamela Steele Associates tool, which is a company-owned tool for management and leadership competencies. And then I've showed you a methodology that you can use yourself, which is a methodology for reflecting on your own job description or people who you're supervising or working with to improve their competence can reflect to find their strengths and weaknesses. And again, if you have any particular questions, hopefully you found that quite interesting. As an aside, we did an activity in Angola where, working with Becky Turner, the country director for PSM there, we did the whole competency framework. So the PTD competency framework, we turned into a manual form where supply chain workers could fill in. So for each of the 200 behaviors listed in that framework, we put a 5-point scale on the end. Becky ran an orientation workshop for the government staff and got them to fill in through the process of self-reflection the areas of strength and weakness. What was interesting is that she was able to provide sufficient data using that process to show the government where the weaknesses were in competency for supply chain professionals, that the government has now prioritized the development of a supply chain master's program at their university. So this is an example where reflective competency approach has generated data, and that data has been used by a government to make changes to how it develops competency in the country. So quite excited about that activity, but that's another way that you can use the competency self-reflection for organizational change rather than individuals, which is what we're discussing here. The next thing I'd like to do is just to give you an overview of a large range of supply chain management professional resources that I've been collecting. These are available as an annex to that 10-page document, which there's a link in the session plan, and obviously available through online, through internet searching. But again, you can imagine that if you've used those previous tools, that you've identified particular competency gaps, that you can then think about what would be the educational tools or training interventions that you would like to undertake in order to improve those gaps over time. And the purpose of showing you these resources is that you can see what's around for no cost for yourselves, but also for your peers and people you're working with to help them. So the first is about supply chain management networks. Now, I think professional networks are extremely important if individuals are going to mix with others working in the same field and learn from them. Within our PSM project, we have our own internal community of practice for PSM staff members as well as USAID staff members. And if you are interested in joining that one, then you just send me an email and I can put you on that community of practice. I usually send out, we've got about 480 people on that community of practice that I share resources, notices for different trainings offered around the world, etc. And also some countries have been using it to share experiences. So that's our project-based community that I wanted to let you know about. The second one is the International Association of Public Health Logisticians. I want to talk about that in a moment in more detail, but I would encourage you to join this. It's free and it's a fantastic environment for engaging with others and learning, but I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. The other is People That Deliver. I acknowledge Alexis from People That Deliver is online today. And People That Deliver you can join if you want to get more information on professionalization of supply chain cadres and systematic approaches to developing cadres for supply chain. And you can go to the People That Deliver website and to do that. eDrug, if your area is to do with supply chain, but also medicines quality, rational use of medicines, as well as pharmacovigilance or adverse effect of medicines, then eDrug is another platform for you to engage with. Lots of people from WHO on that one, as well as lots of country people. Supply Chain Brain is actually a private sector listserv. You can join up for free, and it will give you a little email every day to tell you what the current trends are in supply chain in the private sector. It's mainly USA based, but if you're looking for trends in what's happening in the private sector, then that's a great input to have. I subscribe to each of these. Welcome, Evans. And Annie, yes, I'm sorry, our internal committee of practice is just internal for the project, but the IAPHL is a public available one. Don't feel that you're left out, but it is for focusing on our project. Now, I wanted to take the time just to wave the flag for IAPHL. You can join by going to their website. There's more than 5,000 members now from 140 countries. They have an online forum where members can ask questions. If you've got a particular question about anything to do with the supply chain, you can ask the forum and you'll have 10 to 20 answers in 2 days from people around the world. It doesn't matter your experience, whether you have little experience or lots, you're encouraged to do your questions. The other thing they do is they have a presentation once a month on a particular supply chain topic, and they have an active facilitated discussion on that topic. So for example, just now they're having a discussion around UAVs and what products can be used, transported by UAVs, for example. There's also a big resource page for IAPHL that has a number of resources, e-learning resources, etc. Next, I want to remind you about professional associations certification. Now, these all cost money. They cost fees because they're run by professional associations, but internationally recognized. So all of the organizations here, if you click on those different links, you'll be taken to that professional association's website and you'll see a range of professional accreditation certificates that you can take remotely. They're not usually face-to-face, although they sometimes do have face-to-face. And on the screen, it indicates which particular areas that they focus in. And if you go and explore those, you'll see different certificates. For people on the call who are employed by Chemonics, each year you have an amount of funds that you can use for your professional education. And so by doing a professional reflective activity, highlighting the areas that you want to learn about, and then looking at this list, you may find some quite accessible professional accreditation opportunities that would then be noted globally. So these are globally recognized supply chain certifications. The next is a range of competency resources that are free and available. So you may not know that there are now 3 different free textbooks for supply chain management in health available. There's the USA Deliver book, which is very comprehensive. There's the MSH, Managing Drug Supply, 3rd edition. This is the yellow book that people talk about. And this new one from JSI came out last year, and Supply Chain Manager's Handbook, which goes over the main standard operating procedures and competencies that supply chain managers need to understand when working with health products. So I would be encouraging you to, if you haven't at least read one of these, to be able to have a look through. I like to use them as textbook documents, if you like, to look up in the contents page. If I want to read up more about FASP or warehousing, then I would go to one of these texts in order to look in some detail. Very detailed and helpful. Someone's just asked a question about Six Sigma Lean. So Lean Six Sigma is an accreditation for quality improvement. So Lean Six Sigma, you can have different belts. So you have a green belt, I think it's up to a black belt, which basically gives you the training to be able to do quality improvement procedures in supply chain organizations to improve efficiency and reduce waste. And I would encourage you, Evans, to have a look at the website for more information. In this day and age, most of us have access to internet, and there are a range of fantastic short videos. There's a series from USA Deliver, there's Getting Products to People, which is a little video, and then Arizona State University has a series of videos that introduce a range of supply chain competencies. And I've looked at all of these videos. They are very good, quite short, and good learning bites. And so I'd encourage you to have a look at those different mini video series. Any questions so far? So keep typing in as you go. I will note that my collection of things is not complete because the world is a big place, and I've tried to identify a range. Next is a range of health supply chain courses. So in the UK, there's an institute called the Fritz Institute, and they have a certificate course called MedLog. It's an academic certificate for medical logisticians. It's focused in the humanitarian sector. It's done by distance, but it's also useful for health. French resources. So People That Deliver website has a range of resources they've had translated into French. And then the Logivac Center in Benin, IRSP, has also a range of French-related resources. And our PSM project has begun working with a couple of different countries with different consultants. So Burkina Faso you'll be aware of, but also we've been working in Guinea. So if you're working on a PSM related project, we have some resources that we can share. Now, Empower School of Health, they have a postgraduate diploma. Again, it's an academic distance diploma that covers all areas of supply chain management. Now, they're just in the process of breaking up the diploma into modules. So if you don't want to do the whole diploma, but what you'd like to do is to do a couple of modules. So for example, maybe you just want to do the FAST module or the warehousing module, then they're just about to break up their diploma to make it so that you can access those modules individually for quite an accessible price. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. IAPHL, MIT, massive open online courses, all have free supply chain courses available. Probably the most used from IAPHL is the 12-module series from JSI, which was built through USA Deliver. A great introductory course to supply chain, and you can access that from this link. MIT now makes most of its supply chain training materials available free for you to look at and engage with, but if you want to do their exams and get accreditation, then you need to pay a fee. And MOOCs, this is now the latest trend, is for universities. Alexis and Florence, can you confirm that you can hear me okay? That I haven't dropped off? Evans is having some trouble. Yeah, so Evans, I think it might be something with your computer. Others can hear me okay. I would encourage you to try some headphones if you can, and you can perhaps access this recording later. So this other interesting thing here is, you remember from Module 3 that I spoke about a concept called curriculum curatorship. And the whole concept of curriculum curatorship is just acknowledging the fact that there is so much free training materials available. And in that module, we spoke and said that it's important that training is conducted in the local context according to local needs. And so if you've developed a lesson plan that identifies the local needs, the local learning objectives, then you can pull in material from other sources to deliver the training, and then you can provide your own assessment to make sure that that training is applied appropriately to the local context. And this is something that I try and do all the time and encourage universities and others. And that particular process is called curriculum curatorship. But that's just a sidetrack. The purpose of showing you these resources today is so that you can think about accessing them where you have identified key areas of learning from professional reflection and next steps learning planning. The other area is for this particular series, this 5-module series, you have a particular interest in workforce development. These are 5 global resource suppositories available on the internet, which you can look at, and they have hundreds of documents. Capacity Plus was for human resources. The HRH Global Resource Centre is human resources. Global Health Workforce Alliance is human resources. And a lot of these resources come out of a lot of investment in other health professional areas, but things can be applied to supply chain. So for example, lots of material about motivation, about retention, about costing, human resources, etc. The other one that you need to be aware of is the USAID Development Experience Clearinghouse. You might have heard it called the DEC. Any USAID project that has a deliverable that is externally published must be placed on this website. So all the documents that were published from Deliver, SCMS, Capacity Plus, etc., all projects, but not just health, everything, whether it's education, agriculture, etc., are all on this website. It's a wealth of information. I'd encourage you to have a look. The other one is the Procurement Supply Management Toolbox. This is developed by WHO in conjunction with iPlus Solutions, and is a repository of all sorts of tools to help health supply chain management, whether it's quantification tools, whether it's standard operating procedures, or other guidance can be found on this repository. You need to take time to surf these in order to really understand what they offer you. Okay, so what I've tried to do is to give you a bit of a snapshot in this section of the talk around a range of resources available to you, some free, some not free, that would help you address competency gaps. So this is the overall process we're talking about. So step one is to consider each competency gap that you've identified through competency self-assessment. And in this particular presentation, I've spoken to you about 3 different ways that you can do a competency gap assessment. Then, once you've identified the gap, you can identify a supply chain management education or training activity that fills the identified gap. Then you can plan these activities over a 12-month period, and then you can review your individual development plan every 6 months. And doing that type of approach as a professional, and on this call as a supply chain management professional specifically, is a way that you can really develop your skills and competencies in supply chain management. So my question to you is, how could you use a similar approach to what we've described here to improve the competency of government supply chain employees you work with, mentor, or are seconded to work against? And I'd like you to type any ideas you've got in the chat. So the focus of my presentation today was on how you, as developing supply chain professionals, could improve your own competence. But hopefully you can see, and I want you to write in the chat, ways that you could use this approach in order to help improve the competence of government supply chain management employees who you work with or mentor. And I'd appreciate if you could type some comments in there, because I'd like to see what ideas you come up with and get you to do that. Okay, so for the assignment for this particular activity, as you're typing in there, what I want you to do for this assignment is to use either the free Empower Supply Chain Management Competency Assessment, or use the PSM self-reflective assessment approach, but using your own job description. So complete one of those tools to give you a gap analysis, and then I want you to develop your own individual learning plan for 1 year that's aimed at addressing the gaps. And I want you to be specific about each activity to address the competency gap. And so I want to see both your assessment and your completed year-long learning plan. And again, I will treat those in absolute confidence. And the purpose of me having a look is just to see how you go with applying that process, because I'm hoping that all of you on the call will be able to recognize by now that what we've spoken about today is not only useful for you as individuals in improving your professional competence in supply chain management, but these are methods that you can use with government officials and others you work with to improve their particular competence. So that's what we've done today. We've understood, again, I've emphasized the importance of a competency-based approach when we're looking at capacity development, and in this case, professional development of yourself and others. I've emphasized the importance of developing skills in professional reflection and planned professional development. I've given you an overview of 3 competency assessment tools, and then I've given you a range of resources, both free and for cost, to be able to fill those gaps, develop plans and fill those gaps. And then for those of you who are working towards a certificate from me for this, I've given you an outline for the assignment. I want to thank you so much for being part of this overall series. For those of you who are still interested in doing the assignments, I'm going to give people to the end of June to complete all of the assignments to be considered for the certificate. So you can go back to the recordings and back to the materials to see what's required. Please feel free at any time to send me an email to ask me questions or to get more clarification. And again, we've had 18 to 20 people on the call today, and that's really exciting to see, and from people around the world. So it's been my pleasure to conduct this series with you. I wish you well in your own endeavors, and would encourage you to see how you can apply what you've learnt from this course in the country context that you work to help improve the competence of individuals and the strength of institutions that our project is working with. So thank you so much, and bye for now. I'll stay online for a few moments to see if anyone has any other questions or comments they want to type in the chat. So again, thank you so much for your time today.